Wait, Shin Megami Tensei has religious themes? No. No, of course not. Okay, obviously, yes. SMT borrows heavily from mythology and religion, which is pretty typical of a lot of Japanese media. But there's one aspect that has been rolling around in my head for a while now.
Welcome to the Cathedral of Shadows, where demons gather.
I feel like the minority in this regard, but I was actually pretty heartbroken to see the departure of our friend Mido. I know that he doesn't have that much characterization, but I loved seeing his spooky 80s music video self, and I loved the idea of his consciousness being recorded in an app. But I do think that his departure from the series, at least for SMT5, is most likely for story purposes. Now, from my understanding, our fusing area for this game was translated not to the usual Cathedral of Shadows, but rather the World of Shadows. This in and of itself makes it pretty clear that something is different outside of Mido being missed. See, a cathedral is more than just a church. It's the principal church of a diocese and is associated with the bishop. So we're talking about a building that has significance to the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. And in many of the games that Mido presided over the Cathedral of Shadows, he was often referred to as minister. This can simply imply that Mido is part of some organization and that he isn't the head honcho, although yes, he is confirmed to have transcended the cycle of transmigration. But despite a missing minister and the title of cathedral being stripped away, we are not without religious symbolism. The organ is a fascinating and complicated instrument with a history that's frankly a little difficult to research. However, many in the Western world recognize it as associated with the Catholic Church. It's not abnormal, especially in Europe, to see these beautiful churches and cathedrals with organs that span stories high. If you were raised with a more traditional Catholic or Anglican background, there's a good chance you associate the organ with church. But interestingly enough, up until the middle of the 7th century, most instruments were condemned. Because instruments were commonly used in pagan rituals, the church saw it as blasphemous and touted that only human voices in a choir of appointed clergy were approved by proper worship. And then, for some reason that's super unclear but heavily debated by scholars, the church started welcoming some instrumentation, primarily the organ. If you've ever gone to hear the organ in person, it's quite a spectacular sound. The use of air in the pipes really fills the whole building, and you can often physically feel the vibration. If you're really trying to sell the spectacle of God, playing an organ is not a bad way to do so. Paired with beautiful artwork commissioned by the church, the lavish surroundings were often the most ornate things that the average person would see. On top of that, playing the organ is not easy, to say the least. There are several keyboards, a full set of keys played with the feet, and there are stops to pull to change the sounds in the pipes, and there's not a lot of standardization from organ to organ. Until there are mechanical ways to push air through the pipes, it could take up to 70 people to manually pump air in it for the organist. It's a far cry from a simple keyboard, and it used to be the only way to really replicate that sort of sound. Early prototypes of the piano were pretty lackluster, and the harpsichord was not comparable. On top of it being difficult to play skill-wise, it would have been difficult to get the opportunity to learn as well. One would have to be well off financially to even have access to these giant organs, and they'd most likely be restricted to religious works. If you know how long it takes to master an instrument, imagine how long it took to master the organ. So the type of person who could play this instrument would be well off, extremely skillful, and probably didn't have the time for friends. Subsequently, the organ is often associated with horror, and if you're interested, I'm going to link the video Why Pipe Organ Sounds Scary by Sideways. The video goes into a lot of depth, but I want to highlight one part here.
And right here, we're basically given all the clues as to what makes an organ scary. It isn't the organ per se, but who's playing it. Someone who comes from such a privileged background that they can house and maintain the organ, who probably through their education also understands how to play it, either through the church or an upper class upbringing, who is now using the instrument for their own selfish purposes. Think about it. If you look at this from the perspective of someone from medieval Europe, this guy has managed to manifest the power of God at his fingertips from the comfort of his own home.
Fittingly enough, the ability to create such a sound without the use of a choir or symphony can really emphasize how powerful a person who plays such an instrument for their own devices truly is. So the title of cathedral has been stripped, and the minister is missing. And yet, we still have this very religious instrument that is utilized to create life forms, specifically by Nahobino or Nahobino Kami. Now, the Nahobino no Kami are deities in Shintoism that are specifically related to purification and the removal of calamities. They're known to change misfortune into fortune. Naho means to correct something abnormal, while the B is derived from kushibi, which means the divine spirit, or a divine spirit rather. Furthermore, it's believed that the Nahobino no Kami were made as a counterpart to the Magatsuhi no Kami, and that they both act as two sides of the same coin. It is said that the human heart has a portion of both Magatsuhi no Kami and Nahobino no Kami. According to JapaneseWikiCorpus.org, when people face evil and impurity and respond with anger, hatred, and harshness, it is the act of the portion of the divine spirit of Magatsuhi no Kami. And such anger was calmed over time by the portion of the divine spirit of Nahobino no Kami. Additionally, the Nahobino no Kami can be considered as the priests who perform purification rituals. Purification and removal of calamities does invoke a Christ-like impression. If Nahobino is supposed to be a Christ-like figure in opposition to Demi-Fiend's true demon self, it would make sense that he would not require Mido, or an additional religious institution, to essentially create life. But I don't think we're looking at a Christ-like figure related to simply vanilla Christianity, but rather Gnosticism. I'm not going to get into Gnosticism in this video because it's a lot. There were so many different sects. But essentially, it's a religious sect with similar origins to Judaism and Christianity. And the reason I think Gnosticism is related is because of our new World of Shadows resident, Sophia. Now, according to most Gnostic systems of Syrian or Egyptian roots, the universe was created by one original and unknowable god, often referred to as the parent or Bythos. This one created ions, pairs of progressively lesser beings. Each pair had a male and female counterpart, and they formed the pleroma, or a fullness of God. They aren't to be seen as distinct from the divine, but rather symbolic abstractions of divine nature. In many versions of the Gnostic mythos, Sophia is one half the ion who brought instability to the pleroma. Some texts state that the crisis occurred due to her trying to emulate without her syzygy, or her male counterpart. Other texts state that she tried to breach the barrier between herself and the original unknowing god. When she fell from the pleroma, she felt extreme fear and anguish over losing her life. These emotions caused confusion, as well as a longing to return to the original part of pleroma. This longing accidentally caused matter and soul to come into existence. It also accidentally created the Demiurge, also known as Yaldabaoth, or the son of chaos. Yaldabaoth went on to create the physical world in which he lived ignorant of Sophia's existence, but did infuse spiritual spark, or pneuma, into his creation. Sophia is the highest-ranking divine being that can be seen, straddling between the material and immaterial world, and is said to be responsible for the creation of the 7 pillars, or archons, as well as man. The creation of man was said to be used as a means to deprive the archons of their share of light. She attempts to repeatedly recover the light spark hidden in human nature until the coming of Christ. As Christ is meant to be her syzygy, he's able to draw all the sparks of light into himself, and unite himself with Sophia as her groom bride. He descends upon Jesus, a human vessel who is a pure vessel, and leaves the vessel prior to crucifixion. When he leaves the vessel, he's able to ascend to the upper ions with both Sophia as well as the souls, or light sparks, of her creation for all of eternity. Given this story, it's rather fitting that our protagonist is united with a higher entity, becomes a deity of purification, and unites with Sophia. And as much as I miss my man Mido, his presence wouldn't make much sense in the context of this narrative. Sophia and her syzygy are supposed to be the highest ranking Aeon known to the material world. I hope you guys are super excited about SMT, and if you've played it already, you can let me know how you've liked it in the comments, and if you want to give this video a like, you can, and if you want to subscribe, you can. And yeah, thanks for listening.